The content in this course was designed with care and sensitivity. However, some may find certain topics personally upsetting, especially for survivors of sexual abuse or assault. If you feel the need to talk with someone, please contact your employee relations representative or a related resource in your community. Child maltreatment, often referred to as child abuse and neglect, is a devastating problem in the U.S. Official investigations show that more than 500,000 children are abused and neglected each year, with many more cases going unreported. The Federal Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act, or CAPTA, sets minimum standards for child abuse and neglect. CAPTA defines child abuse and neglect as, at a minimum, any recent act or failure to act on the part of a parent or caretaker which results in death, serious physical or emotional harm, sexual abuse or exploitation, or an act or failure to act which presents an imminent risk of serious harm. There are four main forms of child abuse and neglect. Neglect, including medical neglect, physical abuse, sexual abuse, and psychological maltreatment or emotional abuse. Child abuse and neglect can have a long-lasting impact on a child's growth and development. And research shows that abuse and neglect can cause neurological damage, low self-concept, depression, anxiety, school adjustment problems, and poor academic outcomes, especially in reading. In Texas, child abuse reporting is taken very seriously. Texas law requires anyone with knowledge of suspected child abuse or neglect to report it to the appropriate authorities. This mandatory reporting applies to all individuals, not just teachers or healthcare professionals. It also extends to those whose personal communications may be otherwise privileged. Therefore, all school personnel are required to immediately report suspected child abuse and neglect. This is why additional amendments to the Texas Education Code were passed to raise staff, student, and parent awareness of sexual abuse and other maltreatment. Texas law specifically requires all district and charter school employees to have training concerning prevention techniques for and recognition of sexual abuse and all other maltreatment of children. If you ever have any questions about how to identify or respond to instances of sexual abuse or other maltreatment, please refer to your school and/or district policy for more information. This course provides school faculty and staff members with an overview of mandatory reporting requirements regarding child abuse. By the end of this course, you will be able to identify facts about physical abuse, sexual abuse, and emotional abuse, review signs and risk factors of neglect, and discuss reporting requirements and procedures. Later in the course, you'll have a chance to test what you've learned with a short quiz. So, if you're ready, let's get started. Texas law broadly defines abuse and neglect so that every action or inaction in which a child's physical, mental, or emotional health or welfare has been or may be adversely affected is potentially covered. The statute explicitly excludes an accident or reasonable discipline by a parent or guardian that does not expose the child to a substantial risk of harm. But if you're unsure whether conduct constitutes abuse or neglect, always err on the side of the child's safety and report the incident. In addition to the broad definition, Texas law defines certain specific acts as abuse or neglect. Most of these will be covered in the physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, and neglect sections of this course. Additional acts that are defined as abuse but do not fit neatly into those categories are the current use by a person of a controlled substance in a manner or to the extent that the use results in physical, mental, or emotional injury to a child, causing, expressly permitting, or encouraging a child to use a controlled substance, forcing or coercing a child to enter into a marriage. Although it is important to remember that any child can be abused or neglected, some children are at an especially high risk, including young children and children with disabilities. Young children, especially those under 4 years old, are at a high risk for abuse, in part because they are dependent on adult caregivers for most of their basic needs. Additionally, the same use of physical force may cause more harm to a younger child than an older child. Very young children also do not typically have the language to explain to others that they are being abused or neglected. Children with disabilities are more at risk of maltreatment than children without disabilities. Depending on their disability, they may have a limited ability to physically protect themselves. They may not understand that what they are experiencing is abuse or neglect, or that it is something they can report. Children with disabilities may feel powerless and be isolated from others. Those who rely on caregivers for daily needs may experience a lack of independence and privacy. These factors may make it more difficult for children with disabilities to let others know what is happening. As someone who works closely with children, you can help reduce their risk of abuse and neglect by supporting families and serving as a community connection point to reduce isolation, helping link parents and caregivers to resources when needed, modeling safe and appropriate boundaries, creating an environment where children feel safe to talk about challenges or problems at home, noticing signs a child may be experiencing abuse and neglect, reporting any suspicions of child abuse and neglect. Under Texas law, abuse includes the following acts or omissions by a person unless they are accidental or part of reasonable discipline: physical injury that results in substantial harm or the genuine threat of substantial harm from the physical injury; failure to make a reasonable effort to prevent an action by another person that results in physical injury that results in substantial harm. Examples of physical abuse can include, but aren't limited to, punching, beating, shaking, kicking, biting, throwing, stabbing, hitting, burning, and/or choking. The following signs of abuse do not necessarily mean that a child is being physically abused. Consider any signs in the context of their consistency with a child's medical history and life context. Children with certain medical diagnoses or who are involved in sports may have more frequent injuries. The child's explanation of the cause of the injury, any increasing frequency or severity of injuries, instances of a child reportedly injuring themselves, the presence of other potential signs of abuse, including physical and behavioral signs, and alternate explanations or other challenges the child may be experiencing. Physical indicators of physical abuse can include bruises in unusual patterns, especially linear marks, clusters of bruises, or human bite marks, rope burns, scalding burns, or cigarette burns, specific skeletal injuries, specific head, neck, or back injuries, and specific internal injuries. Behavioral signs of physical abuse can include trying to explain their injury in ways that are unlikely to have happened, refusing to explain how they got hurt, delaying medical attention, or talking about parent not getting them medical attention, seeming afraid of physical contact, especially when it is abrupt, becoming anxious when talking about their home life or certain family members, choosing to wear certain types of clothes to cover up their injuries, such as long sleeves and pants in hot weather, and/or drop in school performance or engagement. Some signs of abuse and neglect may be harder to see in an online environment. If you can see a student's face or body, though, you might recognize some of the signs we've talked about. Much like in-person interactions, do not ask children about injuries in front of other children. In addition, what you can see in the background of a virtual interaction can also be helpful. Is someone yelling or hitting another person? Is there a sign of weapons or other dangerous objects? Other signs will be similar to what you'd see in person. A child might make statements about their home life or family that are cause for concern. They might become more withdrawn or depressed. Their grades may fall. Be aware that learning in an online environment can be distressing for students, and they may have other things going on in their lives that are causing the changes. Remember that signs of change are not always signs of abuse or neglect. In Texas, any sexual conduct harmful to a child's mental, emotional, or physical welfare, or failure to make a reasonable effort to prevent such conduct is considered abuse. It's not necessary to engage in actual physical contact to be charged with child sexual abuse. And under Texas law, it's possible to face prosecution for attempting to engage in any type of sexual behavior with a child. Specifically, Texas law includes the following acts and omissions in the definition of abuse: sexual conduct harmful to a child's mental, emotional, or physical welfare, including the offense of indecency with a child, sexual assault or aggravated sexual assault, such as fondling a child's genitals, penetration, incest, rape, sodomy, and indecent exposure. Failure to make a reasonable effort to prevent sexual conduct harmful to a child. Compelling or encouraging a child to engage in prostitution. We recognize that the term prostitution is not an acceptable term to describe children who are exploited to engage in sexual activities in exchange for anything of value. However, Texas Family Code Section 261.001 uses the term in its definition of abuse to describe conduct a person may exploit a child to do. This training reflects the law as written. The following types of sexual exploitation also fall under the legal definition of child abuse: causing, permitting, encouraging, engaging in, or allowing the photographing, filming, or depicting of a child if the person knew or should have known that the resulting photograph, film, or depiction of the child is obscene or pornographic. Causing, permitting, encouraging, engaging in, or allowing a sexual performance by a child. This means that someone who exchanges images or videos of minors engaging in sexual activity may be charged with possessing or promoting child pornography. This abuse can include exchanging text messages containing nude or sexual images of minors. Knowingly causing, permitting, encouraging, engaging in, or allowing a child to be trafficked, or the failure to make a reasonable effort to prevent a child from being trafficked, is a form of child abuse. Trafficking a child is defined as knowingly transporting, enticing, recruiting, harboring, providing, or otherwise obtaining a child by any means with the intent to engage the child in forced labor, service, or activities related to sexual abuse or exploitation. Remember, we defined sexual exploitation earlier in the course. A person who knowingly benefits from those activities or engages in sexual activity with a trafficked child is also committing child trafficking. Some children are at particularly high risk for trafficking and CSEC. Abusers and traffickers target children in vulnerable circumstances because they are easier to exploit. Groups at high risk include children with disabilities, children with ACEs or trauma histories, children involved in the child welfare or juvenile justice system, and homeless and runaway children. Physical indicators of sexual abuse can include itching or pain in the genital or anal area, sexually transmitted diseases or STDs in young children, repeated urinary tract infections in girls, and or torn or bloody underclothes. Unless you are a school nurse, you likely will not be in a position to notice these signs yourself. However, you may hear a child talk about these experiences, so it is important to be aware of them. Behavioral indicators of sexual abuse can include drop in school performance or engagement, lower level of hygiene, not bathing, not brushing hair, etc., avoiding school or activities they previously enjoyed, changes in eating habits, new fear of a person or place, sexual language that is not age-appropriate, nightmares and changes in sleeping habits and/or regressed behaviors such as bedwetting. The following behaviors could be signs a child is experiencing trafficking or commercially sexually exploited children, or CSEC. Sexualized, intimate, romantic, or other inappropriate relationships with older adults, unexplained absences from school, chronic runaway behavior, unexplained bruises or physical injuries, provocative or overly sexualized clothing, behaviors, and social media posts, secrecy about friends and associates. Remember, risk factors and signs do not necessarily indicate exploitation. Perpetrators of sexual abuse can be of any sex. Victims can be any age, sex, or socioeconomic status. The majority of victims are abused by someone they know and trust, in many cases by family members. In Texas, emotional abuse is defined as a mental or emotional injury that results in an observable and material impairment in the child's growth, development, or psychological functioning. Causing or permitting the child to be in a situation in which the child sustains such an injury is also emotional abuse. It may be more difficult to detect than other forms of abuse, but its effects can be just as damaging. Emotional abuse involves words, may occur with or without other forms of abuse, and causes long-term harm. Examples of emotional abuse include rejection, name-calling, making excessive demands, exposure to family violence, blaming, threatening severe punishment, being cold or unsupportive to the child, openly admitting dislike for the child, shaming, and being harshly critical. Let's look at potential behavioral signs of emotional abuse. Behavioral signs of emotional abuse can include the following: immature or overly mature behavior, unusual fears, truancy, withdrawn or hyperactive behavior, inability to react with appropriate emotion for the context, constantly seeking affection and attention, being overly self-critical, poor peer relationships, and or consistent expression of anger toward others. Child neglect is a serious public health, social services, and educational issue. More children suffer from neglect in the U.S. than any other form of child abuse or maltreatment. And child neglect results in more deaths than any other form of child abuse. Neglect may lead to physical injuries as well as emotional, behavioral, medical, social, and educational problems. Severe neglect can also result in failure to thrive or malnutrition. And neglect is a major reason that children are removed from a home in which parents have substance abuse problems. Neglect is an action or inaction in which a child's physical, mental, or emotional health or welfare has been or may be adversely affected. Under Texas law, neglect includes the following acts or omissions by a person responsible for the child's care: leaving a child in a situation where the child would be exposed to a substantial risk of physical or mental harm without arranging for necessary care for the child and the demonstration of an intent not to return by the caregiver. Placing a child in or failing to remove a child from a situation that a reasonable person would realize requires judgment or actions beyond the child's level of maturity, physical condition, or mental abilities, and that results in bodily injury or a substantial risk of immediate harm to the child. Failing to seek, obtain, or follow through with medical care for a child, with the failure resulting in or presenting a substantial risk of death, disfigurement, or bodily injury, or with the failure resulting in an observable and material impairment to the growth, development, or functioning of the child. The failure to provide a child with food, clothing, or shelter necessary to sustain the life or health of the child, excluding failure caused primarily by financial inability unless relief services had been offered and refused. Placing a child in or failing to remove the child from a situation in which the child would be exposed to a substantial risk of sexual conduct harmful to the child. Placing a child in or failing to remove the child from a situation in which the child would be exposed to acts or omissions that constitute abuse committed against another child, and the failure by the caregiver to permit the child to return to the child's home without arranging for the necessary care for the child after the child has been absent from the home for any reason. Harm from neglect isn't usually traceable to a single incident. It results from the accumulated effects of the many actions that did not occur for or on behalf of a child. You might suspect neglect if you're aware of a chronic or repeated pattern of physical and behavioral risk factors. Keep the child's life context in mind, however. Often, issues related to poverty or culturally based family practices are reported as neglect when they are not. A child is not being neglected just because their family does not have access to resources or because they are being raised differently than others. Possible physical signs of neglect may include inadequate supervision and/or guidance, delayed or inadequate medical care, lack of emotional support from adult caregivers, inadequate clothing. Clothing is too small, not suitable for weather, etc. Living in unsafe housing or lack of appropriate shelter, unexplained weight loss, and/or poor hygiene. Possible behavioral signs of neglect may include complaining of hunger, not eating lunch at school, falling asleep in class, chronic tardiness or absences, apathetic or depressed behavior, loitering after school, stealing, and/or using alcohol or drugs. Texas law requires everyone to immediately report reasonable suspicions of child abuse or neglect to the proper authorities. Licensed professionals and others who work in a licensed facility, such as a school, have additional responsibilities if they have direct contact with children during the regular course of their job. They must report suspected child abuse and neglect within 24 hours and cannot delegate the reporting responsibility to anyone else. Additionally, they must make a report if they have a reasonable cause to believe that an adult was abused or neglected as a child, if disclosing that information is necessary to protect the health and safety of a child, elderly person, or person with a disability. Even professionals whose job involves privileged communication, such as a therapist or healthcare provider, must still report any suspicions of child abuse and neglect. Under Texas law, a person acting in good faith who reports or participates in an investigation or judicial proceeding involving child abuse or neglect is immune from civil or criminal liability and protected against employer retaliation. School staff who have direct contact with children and who knowingly fail to report suspected child abuse or neglect can face criminal and civil penalties. Those penalties are higher if they intentionally conceal child abuse or neglect. Additionally, anyone who knowingly makes a false report of child abuse or neglect can face criminal and civil penalties. Report suspicions of child abuse and neglect by a person responsible for a child's care, custody, or welfare to the Department of Family and Protective Services, DFPS. For urgent situations that could result in death or serious harm, involve children under 5 years old, or for any other matter that needs to be addressed within 24 hours, call the Texas Abuse Hotline at 1-800-252-5400. Or dial 711 if using a relay service such as Relay Texas and have the operator call the hotline number. The hotline is available 24/7. For non-urgent situations, report online at the Texas Abuse Hotline website at txabusehotline.org. For situations where information provided by a child while under the supervision of the Texas Juvenile Justice Department concerns the child's alleged abuse of another child, reports may be made to the Texas Juvenile Justice Department. For emergency or life-threatening situations that must be dealt with immediately, call 911. If the suspected abuse or neglect does not involve a person responsible for the care of the child, reports may also be made to local law enforcement or the state agency that operates, licenses, certifies, or registers the facility in which the suspected abuse or neglect occurred. Be prepared to provide all of the relevant information you have, including people involved, the child's name and address, the name and address of the person you suspect is responsible for the abuse, and others living in the home or who can provide information about the incident. What happened? The information that caused you to believe the child has been abused or neglected and the source of that information. Safety concerns. Information regarding any other concerns about the safety of the child's living situation. Your name, address, and phone number, and your business address and profession if you are a professional who has direct contact with children. Texas law does not allow for anonymous reports of child abuse and neglect. You will be asked to provide your name and contact information. School staff who have direct contact with children as a regular part of their job should also provide their business address and profession. School staff members can receive information about child abuse through direct observation, direct and third-party disclosure, writing assignments, and overheard conversations. Remember, you are responsible for making a report when you have cause to believe that a child's physical or mental health or welfare has been or may be adversely affected by abuse or neglect. You don't need to be certain of the child abuse or neglect, only suspect it. Remember, it is not your role to investigate what happened. Do not ask detailed questions to try to get all of the information listed previously. Report as much as you know and let the authorities take it from there. Under Texas law, each report of child abuse and neglect is confidential, and the identity of the reporter and any person providing information during the course of the investigation will remain confidential. The identities of these individuals and the evidence provided during an investigation cannot be released by the DFPS unless ordered by a court. Unfortunately, child abuse is not just restricted to the student's home. When any school staff member becomes aware of alleged abuse of a student by a school employee, the staff member must immediately report the suspicions to the DFPS by following the same procedure covered previously in this course. If a child confides in you that he or she has been abused, you must make a report. You can also further support the student by following these guidelines. Reassure the child that you care, that you believe them, and that any abuse or neglect is not their fault. Let the child know that they have the right to be safe and did the right thing by telling. And tell the child that you will take action to get them help. Your school has its own procedures for how you should seek assistance for a child who is at risk for sexual abuse or other maltreatment. This includes actions such as referring the student to a school counselor, a social worker, or another mental health professional. Ask your supervisor or school administrator for this information. This course has equipped you with the essential knowledge and skills to identify and address various forms of child abuse and neglect. It's important to be able to distinguish between physical, sexual, and emotional abuse, as well as neglect, and enhance your ability to spot warning signs early. You can protect students from potential harm by recognizing inappropriate behavior and creating a safe environment. Understanding the factors that make certain students more vulnerable to abuse enables you to provide targeted support. You have also gained insights into the best practices for handling student disclosures, ensuring that you respond with sensitivity and care. You are now familiar with the legal requirements and procedures for reporting abuse, ensuring that you can take appropriate and timely action. Your role as an educator is crucial in safeguarding the well-being of your students and preparing you to fulfill this responsibility with confidence and competence. Prevent Child Abuse Texas, known as PCATX, is a statewide nonprofit organization that is working to prevent child abuse and neglect in all its forms throughout Texas. For programs that provide training or other education for school staff members, students, and parents, PCATX can be reached at the following number: 512-250-8438.